Hello and welcome to this video on the shape sequencer of Hive's Hive 2. This is the second video in which I look at some of the modulation possibilities offered by Hive 2, so you might want to check out the first video which looks at the modulation matrix in more detail, along with the slot modifiers down here and how they modify the shape of the modulation signals themselves. In this video I'll be concentrating on the shape sequencer here towards the base of Hive 2, so let's zoom in and have a look at it. The shape sequencer consists of 8 segments shown across the top of the grid. Underneath the segments are 4 lanes A, B, C and D, each of which contain 8 cells. Each of the 4 lanes have a control panel. These allow you to adjust the time base, the trigger and the order of the lanes. Each cell will illuminate when active, like so, and clicking on a segment will load it into the central display. To understand the shape sequencer, I'll begin by examining the patch AZ Angry. So I've loaded up the sound, let's have a listen to it. So to try and work out what's going on, let's switch off the modulation in the lower section here and listen to the sound without any modulation. So we can hear that there's some form of sequencing going on. So let's move to the sequencer section and have a look at that. And you'll see that, yes indeed, as I hold the key, I'm holding down middle C. It's moving through, transposing up 5 semitones from C, transposing 1 semitone from C, and going around again. Now each of those notes, if I just show you, each of those sections is actually a tied note. So if I play them without the tied symbol, each is being tied across there, so I'll put them back on again. So what's going on is that the pitches are being created from the sequencer. So let's switch back to the scope. And now let's switch these back on again and try and break down the patch itself and work out what's going on. So we know the pitches are coming from the sequencer. Let's now solo this filter and listen to this element of the sound. So the sustain bass and what sounds like a kick drum sound is being generated by oscillator 1 and filter 1, because that's what I've just soloed. And indeed, if we look down here, you'll see that the shape sequencer A is controlling oscillator 1 tuning and filter 1 cutoff. It's also controlling filter 2 cutoff and filter 2 volume, that shape sequencer A. So let's solo that. But what's also happening is that shape sequencer B is modulating the volume of oscillator 2. And that's what's giving us that pulse, because basically it's set to, its shape sequencer B is triggering segment 5 repeatedly. So let's put them both on, and let's try adjusting in the control panels the time base. So we know that shape sequencer A is controlling oscillator 1 and filter 1. So if we change the time base to say from a quarter to a half, you can see that we've slowed down relative to lane B. We've slowed down lane A, shape lane A. So let's speed it back up again. So shape sequencer B is controlling oscillator 2 volume. So if we adjust the time base of shape sequencer B, we've sped up the pulse sound. So let's put that back onto 1/8 and let's experiment with some of the values in here. So let's solo filter 1 again, so we just hear the sustain bass and the kick sound. And if we select segment 3, you'll see that becomes active up here, and it's set to a sawtooth waveform. So let's have a listen to that now. In fact, let's turn it down because that's going to be quite loud, quite a bit louder. So there are basically 2 handles at the top of the screen. So you can adjust the level of the handles like so. So if we wanted that to fade in rather than it's causing the pitch to rise rather than fall. So let's put it the other way around. So we'll grab the handles at the top and the bottom and move it like so. Now to give us that more sculpted shape, if you drag in the middle, you can actually control the shape in that way. But there's another trick you can do as well. So if we want that level to sustain more, we can move that up. So, and likewise, if we don't want quite so much of a percussive hit, we can reduce the amount like so. So if we use the mouse wheel, I'm not sure what the command is on the Mac, if you'll have to have a look in the manual for that one, but if you use the mouse wheel, you can actually ratchet. So I'm actually putting in 2 beats similar to the first section of the shape sequencer. And if we keep going, we can add 3 or 4. And if we adjust the shape, we're adjusting the shape of all 4 of them. So you can see with the mouse wheel you can introduce this ratcheting effect. Let's remove it now and have a look at some of the other shapes. So let's call up the second shape, and here this is obviously giving you a rise and a fall. You can adjust the left hand arrow now adjusts the height of the rise, and the height of the fall is adjusted by the right hand arrow. So we're getting the pitch rising and falling, and likewise if we adjust the pitch has gone higher, and if we now drag we can change the shape of it. So you can get sort of turntable type effects by experimenting with this shape. So let's have a look at the third one. The third one is what is reminiscent of a square wave. So if we, but bear in mind you're dealing with a segment, so it's not repeating. So as this is controlling pitch, we can lower the pitch that it affects by moving that handle down, and increase the pitch at which it's released. And again, if I use the center wheel, we can introduce different effects like so. With this segment type, when you move your mouse up and down, rather than adjusting the slope, you're adjusting the width. So there's a lot of room for experimentation. So for now, let's change the segment type back to this square wave, sawtooth rather, and let's create a similar sound to the kick drum. So let's examine the pulse element of this sound. If I solo filter 2, Remember, this is being controlled by the volume of oscillator 2 is being controlled by shape sequence B, so it's purely this section here. So we can adjust shape sequence B, the time base which we looked at earlier. So if it's put it on to a 16th, but we can introduce different by using the by setting all 4 sections on and going to let's go to section 6 and we'll just reduce, if you like, the amount of the attack section. Put that back to an 8th. You can see we're changing the feel. So we've got a slightly different feel now to the pulse. And of course, if we take that down altogether, we can get a completely different feel again. So feel free to experiment with these. You can get some lovely percussive effects, but basically when it's horizontal you can think of this as a level. So you can, for example, assign levels to the filter by just gradually moving the level up like so. So this is quite the sawtooth wave is actually quite a bit more versatile than just the sawtooth shape would lead you to believe. So this patch is called AZ Daybreak, and I thought this would be a good one to look at because there will be times when you need to control the pitch that's being modulated by the shape sequencer. So if we have a look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see that, well, let's have a listen to the sound first. And you'll notice that shape sequencer A and shape sequencer B are both controlling oscillator 1 in Scale Transpose. Now there's also some quantizing, some sample and hold, and a slew limiter set up on this particular modulation matrix. So if you're unsure what they are, have a look at the first video because that goes into what these settings are in a bit more detail. So what does in Scale Transpose mean? Well, let's listen to the sound again. So whilst there are obviously random elements introduced by the sample and hold, we're by and large hearing pitches that are in scale. And if we switch to the keys section, we can see that there in the left-hand octave, the lower left octave, there are a variety of white blobs, and these represent notes in the keys. So if it's a solid white blob, that is the scale that is being played. So let's try disabling some of them, and we'll just select, for example, the notes C and E, and if I hold a middle C again, so we're hearing random variations of, or semi-random variations of C and E, and these are being forced into that scale in the modulation matrix in Scale Transpose. So let's move it back to the original scale by just going back to the original patch. And you'll hear that now those pitches are being assigned. So this is quite a useful facility. It's called in Scale Transpose. And if we look also that we're actually applying modulation from shape sequencer A and shape sequencer B, and that's also being controlled, shape sequencer B, by LFO1. So if I adjust the rate of LFO1, you'll see the effect that that's having. Obviously, if I switch this off, and introduce a bit of the filter cutoff so we can hear what's going on. you'll hear how the two are being used in combination. So I've called up another patch now, AZ Nightfall 2. Let's have a listen to that. And let's try and work out what's going on. Now we've got that in scale transpose again, so we can have a look at the scale of the notes that are actually in the scale there. And there's also a rectifier working on the in scale transpose. Again, have a look at the earlier video if you're not sure what that does. So let's begin by soloing filter 1. This is the sustained pad sound, and if we look at shape sequencer A, you'll see that the shape sequencer A is controlling the scale transpose. So each of these levels is actually raising the pitch. Pitch goes up in 3, down in 4, and you can see it illuminated there. So that's controlling that section. So oscillator 2 is a little bit more complex. I've soloed that. Let's listen to oscillator 2. There's a combination of things going on for oscillator 2. If we have a look here, shape sequencer B, so there's B, and it's represented by those lines, which are pitches, are being controlled by the in-scale transpose command. And likewise, if we look down here, you'll see that LFO2, oscillator 2, in-scale transpose, is also being quantized, having sample and hold applied, and the slew limiter. Now, also, function 2 is being used as an envelope generator to create that rhythmic effect. There it is without the function 2. We're going to be looking at the function generators in the next video, but this lets you hear a little bit more clearly what's going on in the scale transposing. And if we increase the amount of modulation depth, you can hear the effect on the patch there. So if we put on the function generator, which is set for an envelope, it's going to give us that pulsing effect, which is opening and closing the filter. So we put the two together. So all I'm doing is literally holding down middle C, and all the pitches are being generated by the in-scale transpose on both oscillator 1 and oscillator 2. So let's have a quick look at the order section at the bottom of the shape sequencers. This particular patch is called EH Bells for a More Peaceful World. I'll just hold down middle C, and if we look at what's going on here, we'll see there's two distinct things going on. Shape sequencer B is going from right to left, but also you'll notice that not every segment has to be selected. You can actually, deselect them, and it will go through and play them in order. Now that is set to pool, which is playing from right to left, the opposite of loop, and the top segment is playing left to right. So let's see what they're controlling. Shape sequencer A is controlling oscillator 1 volume and oscillator 2 volume. So let's look at the different orders we can select for shape sequencer A. To show you what I'm doing, I'm going to switch the keys back on. So we're going to leave B going merrily on its way in the opposite direction, but let's try looping and setting to pool value shape sequencer A. So as you can see, it's now going from right to left. But what's important to notice is that each segment plays from left to right. So in other words, a percussive segment, when played from right to left, will still be percussive. So if we look at the segments now, percussive, triplet. So each segment is playing from left to right, but the play order is from right to left in the pool mode. So if we set it to random, each segment is being triggered in a random order. And if I set it to one shot, what will happen is, as I play, it'll move through each segment in turn once, and when it gets to the final segment, it will just sustain. So that's one shot mode. One by one means that each time I trigger, if you watch the notes triggering on, I'm going to trigger the note of C. Each time I trigger, it's triggering the next segment. And then one random will trigger a random segment each time I play a note. So that's looking at the order, the segment play order in the shape sequencer. Finally, let's take a look at a more subtle use of the wave sequencer with the patch BL Cloud M9. Gorgeous patch, let me play it for you. I'm just going to hold down middle C. As you can hear though, we're getting a chord, and the chord is coming from the use of the sub-oscillators. As you can see, they are detuned. Sub-oscillator 1 and 2, and they're both routed. Oscillator 1, sub-oscillator 1, oscillator 2 and sub 2 are both routed into filter 1, and that's what gives us the chord when they're all detuned, and that's what gives it by the specific amounts, and that's what gives us the chord. Now the chord is also being routed, the filter rather, is also being routed into filter 2, so the output of filter 1 is feeding into filter 2, which is a high pass filter, and that is what's giving us that little bit of movement at the high end. That filter 2 is the cutoff of filter 2 is being modulated by LFO2 down here. But if we look at the shape sequencer, you'll see that shape sequencer C is the only lane that's active, and segment 1 is a simple rise and a fall, and that's adjusting the position of the wavetable position of oscillator 1 and oscillator 2, only by a small amount. If we have a look at oscillator 1, you'll see, if you look at the top of the screen, it's set to 3.33, and oscillator 2 is minus 6.66. So it's only adjusting them by a small amount. But if we're holding down that middle C again, you'll see the wavetable adjusting. It's just subtly sweeping through the wavetables, up and down. And that's what gives that slight movement and the organic feel of this lovely patch. Well, that about brings things to a close for this video. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already for future videos on synthesizers, VST instruments and music tech in general. In the next video I'll be looking at Hive 2's function generators. So until then, let's load up a track featuring sounds from Hive 2 only, including this patch BL Cloud M9. So here we are in the arrangement, and Cloud M9 is featuring, this is the first part, Hive Jam, has some percussive elements, again coming from Hive itself. There's a bass sound, sort of a Moog bass, lead, the patch Wonderful, which was in the previous demo piece, my own string sound, again from Hive 2, and a patch called Sourshine. So let's play this track now. Thanks very much indeed for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.